Good morning, everybody. Welcome to IndyCar on the last day of April 2019. It's kind of ironic that tomorrow is May Day, given the name of the Prime Minister. But yesterday I was talking on my written blog posts about the idea of gaining independence without involving oil in the equation at all for the economy of Scotland. In other words, making Scotland independent and completely decarbonising it virtually at the same time. The idea of leaving oil in the ground might seem absolutely abhorrent to people who have witnessed Scotland's oil revenues being sucked away by the British state over the decades. But I have a reason for mentioning this morning, this idea of oil and the liberation of Scotland from its current position, a sort of trapped union with England. Now, we often complain that the British media ignores independence and has ignored independence, particularly the BBC, which has had a blanket blackout of all mention of the SNP conference over the last few days, except one or two small headlines here and there on its website, which have been made deliberately difficult to find. However, yesterday's Guardian seemed to take a totally different approach to independence. And in that English edition newspaper yesterday was an article by a columnist who claims that he feels that it's time for Theresa May to actually deal with independence for a number of important reasons. And he pointed this out in his article. The first one is that independence is now a much bigger problem for Nicola and for Mrs May than indeed the Northern Ireland backstop. It's a far more urgent issue for Mrs May than it's going to be with Ireland. All the media attention has been focused on the Irish backstop and Brexit up until now. Independence has been largely shut out of the British media for the entire period of Brexit, and that was done deliberately to minimise any mention of it in the English press, so that English people would be of the opinion that Scotland was part of the UK and had agreed to Brexit, which we know is a lie. But now what's happened is that for the first time since this blanket ban on talking about independence in the English media, we are now starting to see the first little green shoots of realisation among the British press, or the English press, that the case for independence is now not something that the British government can any longer ignore. They're going to have to deal with the Scots somehow or other. And this particular columnist was suggesting something which I think is beginning to look a lot like independence. He claims that Theresa May is going to have to give Scotland permission to have its referendum, and also he claims that she's going to have to give Scotland some kind of independence is going to be necessary. Some kind of independence is going to be needed in order to solve problems between England and Scotland. And he went even further actually and suggested that there should be a trade deal done between England and Scotland. This is something that I spoke about 2 or 3 times in my video blogs and also written blogs over the last few weeks. The idea of ending the Treaty of Union with England and replacing it with a new trade deal. And this is precisely what this article was talking about. The idea that Scotland could come to an agreement with England over oil and over a shared currency even. He was even talking about a currency union and possibly a customs union between England and Scotland to keep the trading partnership alive, despite the fact that Scotland wishes to rule its own roost and not be ruled by London anymore. So there is a dawning realisation for the first time since the referendum in 2014 by the British press that independence is now not just on the agenda, it's in the faces of Mrs May and her government. Now, I'm paraphrasing this article because I don't have it sitting in front of me, but I read things very carefully and my memory for facts is usually fairly good. But one of the things that struck me about the article particularly was the mention of oil, and the idea that oil would be used in the horse trading between Scotland and England, and an agreement would be reached on just how much of the oil and gas in the North Sea each of the two countries would agree to have or to trade with one another. And this is something which I've touched on repeatedly in the past, that England will have to deal with Scotland in the future, after Brexit and after independence. And they are going to have to start negotiating with the Scottish Government exactly what the share of the mineral wealth in the waters around the British Isles will be. Despite the British Government having illegally moved the marine boundary northwards at the start of the Scottish Parliament when it was first opened. It was done secretly. Tony Blair and Donald Dewar moved the marine border northwards so that a lot more of Scotland's territory was basically nicked by the British state, so that they could include about 6,000 square miles of Scottish oil-bearing seabed. That needs to be fixed before any kind of horse trading or dealing was done. But the interesting thing is that this is the first time that any English newspaper has suggested that there ought to be independence for Scotland. And not only that, but that Mrs May should do a deal with Scotland once it's independent to create a new trade deal between the two countries. I take this as being a very optimistic sign. It's not going to be the last of these articles either. I think if this one columnist is beginning to think this, then other journalists in the English press pack will also be beginning to wake up and realise that Mrs May is at her weakest. The British government has never been as weak as it is now, and it will never be in a weaker state to negotiate with Scotland than it is now. And most political commentators on both sides of the border now acknowledge that Nicola Sturgeon has picked the precise moment, the exact moment when the British government is at its weakest to announce the countdown to a new referendum. Now you'll probably be saying, but she hasn't named the day. But what she has done is set out a time frame, and it will be within the next 2 years at some point, because the end of the Scottish parliamentary term comes up in 2021. So in May 2021 there has to be a Holyrood election, and the British government now knows that if they do not give Scotland a Section 30 order, that particular election in Scotland, a general election where 16 and 17-year-olds can vote, and where European nationals living in Scotland can vote, that the Scots will use that election as a de facto referendum on independence, and they will win it. And because of that, the Tories now know that they have to do a deal with Scotland, not just with the SNP, but with the whole country. They're going to have to make their peace with us, and they're going to have to make us an offer that we can live with and that they can live with. Remember, this is not just Scotland making demands of England. We can hold our referendum, and we will hold it. And if we don't get a Section 30 order, we will still vote on independence. And all of the measurements and polls that are used to measure public opinion are saying that we will win it. We're not there yet in terms of solid backing, but we haven't seen a poll yet that includes 16 and 17-year-olds, and we haven't seen a poll yet that includes European Union nationals who are now living in Scotland and are now Scottish voters. We haven't included them. Until we see that, we don't know exactly what the support level is, but all the predictions are that it's going to be well above 50% right at this moment. So we're starting from a position of strength, not weakness. The British government is starting from a point of weakness, not strength. The British government is having to fight 3 different battles at once now. It's fighting a battle, well actually it's 4 different battles when you think about it. They're having to fight an internal battle with themselves, an external battle with the European Union, another battle with Northern Ireland over the backstop. I guess that's another EU battle as well, and a confrontation with Scotland over its independence, and a likelihood that Scotland will take its independence. It's not going to just ask for it, it will take it back. And not only will it take it back, it will do so legally, and it will have the European Union and the international community on its side this time. So it's not looking good for the UK. And as I say, for English papers to suddenly come out with a story which is pro-independence for the first time ever, as far as I can see, is a major landmark in the British media's treatment of Scotland and its impending independence. So it's really all good news for us just now, and I anticipate that this will continue to happen. But I also anticipate that the media blackout by the BBC and ITV in Scotland will continue, and it will continue to black out as much of the SNP's messages as possible. Therefore, we have to rely much more heavily on the internet media for your news. If you want to hear the truth about what's happening in Scotland, you will need to abandon the television set and either watch foreign news media, or even better, watch the indigenous new Scottish media, like Broadcasting Scotland, like Phantom Power, like myself, like we Ginger Dogs Dugcasts, and all the other sort of panoply of different social media outlets, Wings Over Scotland, Bella Caledonia, if you like their kind of stuff, all kinds of different columnists and different outlets for real news in Scotland are all there for you to watch. Plus the SNP will obviously be putting out their own posts on all social media platforms, so you will be able to get news, reliable news about what's really happening in Scotland. But I think we're probably going to start to see some independent polling happening by people in Scotland, by the SNP for a start, and by the Scottish Government itself putting out real figures about the reality of the Scottish economy today. And remember that the Scottish economy at the moment is running perfectly well on only half of the funding that it actually makes in taxation. The other half, 41% or more, is going to England. So Scotland is running a full country on half the money it should have without any oil revenues at all. So just bear that in mind. When people say you're too poor, we're not too poor. If we get all our tax revenues back and we no longer send them to England after independence, we will have between 58 and 60 billion pounds per year to run the country, almost twice what we are given by Westminster at the moment. And that's without any oil revenues at all, not a single penny from oil. Which is why I'm saying to you, the oil is a bonus, and the oil is a trading commodity. We can trade it with other countries as well as England if we want. We are already selling about 40% of the oil that we make. In fact, no, it's more than that. I think it's nearly 60% of the oil that we pump out of the North Sea to Europe. And that money that's being made from that is going to the oil companies. It's not even going to the British government because they're not taxing it. Anyway, I don't want to start another rant, but my point today is that something has changed in the English media. They are woken up and they are beginning to realise that Theresa May has to now do a deal so that Scotland has its independence and that Scotland and England have a new trading arrangement in place for post-Brexit. Now, if that is being said in the English media, then it's being said somewhere in the cabinet in Westminster as well. That realisation is coming from somewhere, and if one journalist in the English press can think of it, then remember the strategists in Whitehall can think of it as well. So I would anticipate we'll start to hear an awful lot more about federal Britain, about Scotland getting more powers, more stuff like the vow, the idea of a federal Scotland or home rule where we have everything except control over foreign policy and defence. That will be the next thing that they will try to blitz us with. So just beware, we have the whip hand here and we don't have to take any half measures. We've been offered half measures all the time. Even the parliament that we have at the moment, as I said, it's a gilded cage. It's there to trap Scottish ambitions for independence so they can't get any further. But it's the way that we have at the moment, democratically, to get to independence, and we'll use it. And we now have the strength on our side. The tide is turned. The momentum is now with the Yes movement, with the independence campaign groups across Scotland, and there are thousands of us now, thousands of groups, millions of people mobilised now. And bear in mind that on Saturday, on the 4th of May, Star Wars Day, May the 4th, there is going to be probably the largest independence march ever in Glasgow on Saturday. The All Under One Banner March is taking place from 1:30, as far as I understand it, from all the posts that have been made, in defiance of Glasgow City Council's ruling about starting it early. Although frankly I think people will converge on Glasgow far earlier than 1:30 anyway, and with the sheer numbers of people expected to descend on the city for this gigantic national event, I anticipate it's probably going to be the biggest march of any kind in Scotland that there has ever been. And despite people's misgivings about the characters involved in leading such marches, and sometimes there are personal disputes between people and differences of opinion, this is still a vital event. And the independence movement, if you can do nothing else other than use your keyboard, but if you're mobile enough to get to Glasgow on Saturday, then turn up, march and show your support. Even if you are just being wheeled along in a wheelchair, or if you're walking on crutches, or you have to have somebody else carry you piggyback, it doesn't matter, but turn up. Remember what Woody Allen said, history is written by those who bothered to turn up. And let's face it, we are the people who are bothering to turn up. The march recently in, I think it was Lerwick, was it? I think in the Hebrides, in the Outer Hebrides, was the first of its kind on the island, I think, that there's ever been. And is it Orkney? I'm just trying to remember if it was Orkney or Shetland where the march was. I think it was Orkney, wasn't it? But anyway, the first ever independence march on that island, and over 750 local people marched. Now that may not sound like a lot to us on the mainland, but on a small island community, that's over 10% of the population took to the streets. First time it's ever happened. So things are changing rapidly, and like I say, the wind is at our backs now, the tide is in flood, and we are moving with it, and it will get stronger all the time. And the very first time that I have ever seen a British newspaper suggest that Mrs May needs to give, or not to give Scotland independence, but to do a deal with Scotland so that after independence the two countries can still trade. I'll leave you with that interesting thought today. Have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye bye.